Well, welcome back, everyone. I'm James Fernie. I'm Politico's Energy, Climate and Sustainability Editor. So ever since the end of the pandemic and Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine, the soaring cost of gas and energy has focused the minds of Brussels policymakers. So how do we ensure affordable, reliable, clean energy for Europe's households and businesses? The Affordable Energy Action Plan announced earlier this year is one of the Commission's answers to this. Fundamental to this plan is building a big, modern electricity grid that's dominated by zero-carbon generation and can carry electricity across Europe on truly transcontinental power lines. Unlike the grids of the past that have centred around enormous lumbering coal, gas and nuclear plants, the grids of tomorrow will be powered by much less centralised generators, wind farms in the North Sea, solar farms in Spain, hydro in Scandinavia, and lots of behind-the-meter generation, like rooftop solars. So all this needs to be backed up by huge amounts of storage, like batteries, pumped hydro, and so on. To make things much more complicated, electricity demand is set to soar as we move away from direct fossil fuel-powered sources to electricity, hopefully powered by cleaner sources. So all this requires vast amounts of investment. The Commission estimates something like 570 billion euros a year between now and 2030, and then rising to closer to 700 billion after that. So in other words, it's an absolutely monstrously huge task. We've got a really great panel today to talk about these issues. We've got Wolberger Hemmetsberger, Chief Executive Officer of Solar Power Europe, Alexander Roeder, Climate and Production Director of Plastics Europe, and Svetlana Pankova, who's a member of European Parliament from Bulgaria. So Svetlana, can we start with you? So the grids package is coming, which is probably one of the core parts of the Affordable Energy Action Plan. It's coming next week. What are you, when you think about affordable energy, what are the absolute core issues from your point of view?
So I think our main goal at the moment is to basically make sure that the Affordable Energy Action Plan turns from a crisis response into a long-term sustainable strategy and legislative backbone, which basically tackles the main issue of high electricity and energy prices across the Union. So the first layer of the problem is that we've seen a massive inflation in the prices of electricity and energy across the EU. And the second layer of the problem is we see quite significant discrepancies in terms of the electricity prices in between different member states. So the grids package is expected to resolve exactly this issue by offering a proper and real, this time, connectivity across the Union. We are aiming to have more or less similar prices everywhere. So this is, of course, the matter which concerns our consumers and industries the most. But also this was the underlying plan from the very beginning of the start of the Green Deal, simply because we've invested quite a lot in renewables already. And I'm sure my colleagues here would be presenting a bit more information on that as well with proper data. But we've invested quite significantly in renewables in the last 6 to 7 years, both from a funding perspective and, of course, from a regulatory easing framework. We've more or less agreed that the base load power for the EU is going to be around nuclear energy. And now, to make the most efficient use of everything we have on the table, we need to create a properly connected grid to manage to share all the energy and not leave certain regions with low prices at some point and high prices at a different point of time. So the idea is to have it stable, predictable in the long run. Okay, great.
Well, there's a lot of points there that we'll come back to in the discussion, but maybe turning to you, Wolberger, what are you really looking out for in next week's grids package?
Yeah, I mean, it's clear, and I very much agree with you, Svetlana, that we need to now deliver on the Affordable Energy Action Plan. not just because of competitiveness, what you just mentioned. We need to bring down energy prices, there's no question. But also because we don't want energy to be weaponized. We need to make sure that Europe is secure and we can provide that security with decentralized, homegrown electricity. So we have a huge interest to go fast and really act in lightning speed to get all of that done. What is central? That's electrification. It's key. It is Europe's lifeline to electrify our economy. And what we're looking forward is obviously, now seeing the actions that are being taken on infrastructure, on flexibility, which is a very, very important point, but also on taxes and levies. So Bulgaria is leading the way on that, on the industrial taxes, which is great. But we need to see a level playing field on taxes when it comes to electrification as quickly as possible.
Can you explain what you mean by that exactly?
Yeah, but it's clear that electricity is still in many countries taxed higher than gas, for example, than other fossils, and this needs to change. And then obviously also industry, we need to find ways to make sure that industry is, as quickly as possible, getting to cost competitive prices. That has to do with taxes, but that has to do with a lot of other things. We need to make sure that gas is not setting the price as much anymore in the electricity system. And this is building a lot of new renewables very quickly. We are delivering the solar sector you were mentioning. You want to hear figures at Elena. We are coming up with our latest data, with our latest European solar market outlook on the 11th of December, so please stay tuned. But a little bit of a sneak preview. We will be adding, again, a lot of solar to the electricity system this year. I cannot give you the exact figure, but it's more than 60 gigawatt. If you indeed compare that to other capacities, it's huge. And that makes that solar will be representing or will have served Europeans with 13% of our electricity demand this year.
3-0.
1-3, but together with wind, we're much more than 30% now, and that's more than gas. So, we are really moving ahead, but our problem is that renewables are moving ahead at really high speed, but then the electricity system that we have today is too small, too inflexible, and it's really holding us back to deliver to the benefits of industry, to the benefits of households. And this is where we want to see relief, and we can go into the details. Flexibility plays a very important role on that.
Well, we'll dig into all that. So 13% of this year of electricity used in Europe came from solar?
Yes.
Okay. Alexander, so you represent the plastic sector, one of the big energy-intensive sectors. And when we think about the challenge of becoming a net zero continent by 2050, the industries like yours are among the hardest challenges. And a big part of that is electrifying a lot of the processes that currently aren't electrified. So how do you see this journey? What's key for you when you look at the Affordable Energy Action Plan?
Okay, thanks a lot, James. First of all, allow me to give a little bit of background so that you understand what we're talking about, because you have heard certainly about the impact of energy costs on our competitiveness, but really to give you a little bit more of an understanding. So, as you mentioned, we are in fact the biggest industrial consumer of electricity and natural gas in Europe. And we're also a critical supplier for other strategic sectors such as defense, automotive, construction, but also the renewable sector, by the way. And when we look at the competitiveness issue in our sector, it is really serious. I mean, we're talking about practically a halving of our global market share in less than 20 years, since 2006. And many of you may have seen that recently there were additional plant closures announced. And energy costs are a very important factor in all of this. So electricity prices are significantly higher than in competing regions. If we look at gas prices, recently we've seen levels here in Europe 4 to 5 times that of the US, which means that for a major plastic on the market, gas costs represent now 40 to 50% of the market price compared to roughly 10% in the US. And that, of course, impacts our competitiveness, which means Europe is losing jobs, it's losing innovation, it's losing investments. But the implications go beyond just our sector. It also means that this jeopardizes Europe's strategic autonomy and our transition towards a circular economy. So in this situation, we definitely see the Affordable Energy Action Plan as a step in the right direction. However, how long is it going to take to really have tangible results, and will those be sufficient to bring European competitiveness back? So as a sector, we need action on energy costs, and we need quick results.
So, I mean, when you look at energy costs for industries like yours, the direct cost of gas has obviously gone up a lot. It's come down a bit from the peaks, but it's still very high compared to the US, for example. But then, if you look at the cost of electrifying a lot of your processes, it's much higher again, right?
Yep.
How much of so the plastic sector uses fossil fuels as a feedstock? That's one part of it. But in terms of put that aside. In terms of your other processes, how much of it can be electrified?
Electrification has been identified as one of the key levers for decarbonizing our sector. When I say decarbonizing, we mean getting to net zero. We don't mean getting rid of all the carbon, because without carbon, plastics without carbon is like soccer without a ball. You need that. It's the central part that keeps the polymers together. But if you look, for instance, at our roadmap that is available on our website, you will see there electrification is mentioned there. There is one central process in the production of most polymers, which is called the steam cracker. It's a refinery process. I won't go into the details, but that is a major source of CO2 emissions in the plastics value chain, and that can be electrified. In fact, some of our members, SABIC and BASF, together with Linde, they installed a couple of years ago a pilot plant in Ludwigshafen, but that is a very small plant. We're talking here about a throughput of 4 tons of material per hour.
And that was the first proper size one in Europe, is that right?
That was to my knowledge, it was the first one, at least at this size.
So we're at a very early stage in this electrification process.
Yeah, I mean, the technology, we know it can be handled. Mm-hmm. We've had a lot of very good experience with this pilot plant. But scaling it up, I mean, we're talking then more than an order of magnitude. We're not talking about 6 megawatts of power that goes into this, which is nowadays one big wind turbine. We're talking about hundreds of megawatts, and that can double easily the power consumption of a chemical plant.
I mean, when we're thinking about the challenge of keeping Europe's big key industries like chemicals, like steel, alive and remaining a manufacturing centre, while also reaching the climate goals that Europe has set itself. Solving this problem seems absolutely key, and that means really quickly changing the way electricity is generated and transmitted, and doing that really fast. Maybe I can turn to you, Volberger. You're in the solar industry, so you're a key part of solving this problem, but not the only part. How do you see, what happens to speed this process up? Do you think you can deliver companies like, industries like Alexander's with the cheap electricity that they need to keep going?
Yeah. Maybe allow me just one comment, because you said your power demand will go up big times. I think it is also important to say that your energy demand will go down because it's more efficient. To just comment on that. But on your question, what we need is flexibility big times. So what we are expecting from the grids package that is coming out in a couple of days is that we really see a flexibility first principle in grid planning. I brought this one. So that's our campaign, Let's Flex. And if you turn it, it's all the points that I want to mention indeed, which we need to see. So that's our 30-page report on one page. So basically 3 points that I want to mention here. One is that grid planning and flexibility need to go hand in hand. That's very clear. So when we talk about reinforcing grids, it also has to do with reinforcing flexibility and not just building cables. Modernizing grids is extremely important.
When you say flexibility to the layman, what exactly do you mean? How do we not have that?
That's very clear that it is flexibility that is coming from demand, demand that we would want to see increase, electrification that can come from industry when it's possible, that is coming from households, but also big times from assets like batteries. Battery storage is the game changer in the energy transition, and we need to see just much more.
So this is a grid where you've got, the intermittency of solar and wind is a problem in modern grids, but you've got a situation where you can kind of adjust where it's all coming from very quickly, respond to demand and supply. Is that what you're talking about?
That's what I'm talking about, indeed. So that
that requires quite a lot of technology, doesn't it?
But that requires technology, but technology that we have. So we have the solutions at hand. It's just about rolling them out and making sure that we can benefit from these technologies. Just to give you one example, in 50% of the households in Europe, we don't have smart grids yet. So grids are not digitalized yet. If you don't have these basics, it is difficult to roll out the technologies that we have in order to provide flexibility. So these are the things that need to happen. But we need to integrate it also, because we know what we need, but we need to integrate it in grid planning. We need to make sure that we're also not flying in the dark when we are transitioning and when we're rolling out the new energy system. Because to also give you an example, we don't know today in many countries where there's space in the grids for new renewable projects. Clients also don't know, whether the grid is good enough for them to connect. So we need more transparency. Grid hosting maps, that's another thing we want to see. And then the third point is that we want to make sure that there's incentives for everyone, for clients, for consumers of electricity, to electrify, and that has to do with then also providing incentives. We need to make sure, time of use tariffs, for example, that you're incentivized to be flexible. For us, as the producers, it means that we need to make sure that grid operators are prioritizing those projects that are flexible, hybrid projects where you combine solar and storage and wind in the best case. And then, in the end, system operators need to be remunerated for procuring flexibility and not for building new cables. So that's the essence of the asks that we have in order to bring more flexibility to the system with big benefits for everyone. Win-win for the consumers because they pay lower electricity prices. And a win-win also for those who want to build new renewables, because at the moment with negative prices and curtailment, it's happening at a lower speed.
Yeah. There's a lot of points there I'd like to come back to as well, but maybe bring you back in, Svetlina. So you've talked a lot about bottlenecks, and there's parts of Europe which are just not power prices have gone up, and you've identified transmission as a key. But you've also said that a big problem is permitting takes forever. What do you see as the solution to this?
That's the key question everyone is asking us, and we hope to see some of the answers in the grids package. And if we don't see them, that's the role of the Parliament actually to make sure that those answers are provided there. If you just allow me to take a step back, just because you've asked a very valid question: what's flexibility, and why do we need the flexibility in storage? So, if we don't have flexibility in storage, we're going to have a grid which is not efficient and it's more expensive. And we're actually trying to resolve that problem. So that's why I completely agree with the points made that the flexibility and storage are key. But when we speak about bottlenecks, that's why we're speaking about a proper European connected network. Because at the moment, there are a few points in Europe. I'm not sure most of the people do know them, but they're in the Central Europe where there is a bottleneck which stops the East to be connected properly to the North. We've seen some real examples on the southwest side of Europe when without the proper connectivity, it can end up in blackouts for countries, because that was the problem if you cannot react and resolve it. So I think the question here is, we know the bottlenecks, so we have to make sure that they are tackled in a quick manner, because realizing that without connectivity, it's going to be very difficult to address the issue that Alex brought to the table in terms of competitiveness against other regions. Because at the moment, we're competing among each other in the EU on a basic commodity as electricity prices. And that's not okay. We have to build a system which is gonna be more beneficial for some parts than others, looking at the electricity prices now, but that's the only way for us to be competitive when we look at China or the US, for instance.
When you talk about bottlenecks, I mean, and say connecting the North with the East, you mentioned one of the bottlenecks. It seems like this is one problem that has quite a simple answer, which is more, better, higher capacity transmission.
Exactly. It's just infrastructure.
It's just infrastructure, but that obviously costs money. And I'm just, that the question is, where does the money come from?
Well, the Greece package is meant to be offering some part of financing. Actually, one of the big aspects we expect from that is the proper dedicated funding for that infrastructure. It has to be completely renewed, updated, or completely rebuilt in some places where the bottlenecks are.
Yeah.
So that's the promise at least we hear, and we hope to see something more specific next week.
It's sort of finding a way to incentivize private
but if we
investment.
don't invest in that, basically everything we're speaking about is going to be just wishful thinking, because if we don't guarantee that stability of the electricity market and prices across our union, then we cannot be speaking about competitiveness and industrial boost, which is more or less the main goal of this European Parliament and the Commission, as it was indicated at the beginning of the mandate.
And then the advantage of transmission is a wind company thinking of putting up a wind farm in the North Sea, if it knows it can sell as far away as Bulgaria.
Yeah.
Much more easily. It knows that
and this gives also long-term predictability for investors as well, because you've said that the permitting timing at the moment is probably still not at its best, which is true. But also one of the big other problems is the long-term predictability of investors in those areas, because they don't know if they're going to have the demand. They don't know if they can expand to all the regions. So,
Alexander, this vision of a kind of much better connected, much better supplied power grid, does this vision convince you? I mean,
I think you will hardly find anyone who will go against that idea, and it's definitely something that we will need. You were mentioning bottlenecks. We hear from our members that yes, grid connection is a key bottleneck at the moment. I mentioned it before. Doubling your power consumption is nothing that can be done overnight. And for some of the bigger electrification projects, this has definitely been identified as one of the key bottlenecks. So for us, this is definitely something that is required. But then, sorry for this slightly negative thought, but this is going to take a lot of time. Grid development does not only require money, it also requires time. And just speaking for my sector, we may not have this time to wait for it. So this does not mean we should not invest in it, but we also need to flank this grid development with short-term measures that were mentioned before already by Burger, talking about tariffs, taxation, and so on, to relieve the cost pressure on European production immediately.
right. I mean, how, without that, the plastic sector, I mean, I hear a lot of people saying that, in 10 years there may not be a plastic manufacturing sector purely because of these dynamics.
I don't have a crystal ball, I'm afraid, but yes, we are very concerned. And I mentioned before, in 20 years, halving of our global market share. If you look at the trade press, there's practically every week another plant closure is announced. So yes, we do see here a very dire situation. It's not just energy cost. We also have to say that. It's also about other factors. But energy cost is certainly a major factor, and one where we see that policymakers have a certain room for quick fixes that will, in a rather short term, improve the situation, not only of our sector, but of European industry as a whole.
I've got an interesting question for you, Walburga, which is, what is the role, in your view, of fossil fuels in the electricity system over the next 30 years?
I mean, as I was mentioning already, I think we have an interest of getting rid of fossil fuels as quickly as possible. That's also the plan that the European Commission has. Not just because it is, gas I was mentioning is still setting the price in too many hours, making life difficult for households, for industries. So I do think we have a clear interest also for security reasons. I do not have to tell you that the negotiations that we are participating globally at the moment as Europe would look differently if, if we would not be that dependent on energy imports. So I do think we have a very, very strong interest in moving forward very quickly. I mean, it will not happen tomorrow, obviously, but the faster, the better for Europe.
And do you see, gas is the useful thing. Germany is going through this at the moment, and it's being challenged on state aid points. But gas has the advantage of it can be very flexible, so you can just switch on peaker plants when they need and turn them off, so they can back up. Wind and solar, how do you, as a renewables, 100% renewables person, what do you think of that?
I would challenge that, because if you look at what batteries can do for the system, it's a much faster response, and then you were going into technicalities. But, this is why we are so much asking for 10 times more batteries by 2030, because this is flexibility that is available very quickly. Gas-fired power plants, you need to build them. It takes a while. You need to have turbines that are powering your gas-fired power plants, and batteries are here to be deployed. The market is already growing big times. The costs have gone down 90% in the last years. So what are we waiting for? We just need to have regulation that is helping us. For example, double charging for grid fees that are charging you double for batteries. Batteries at the moment cannot participate in all markets, so you need to open revenue streams also for batteries and have a level playing field here. And a couple of other points. For example, to give you one other example. Solar plants, we would like to make them more flexible, existing ones, but in many cases you cannot retrofit your solar plant that is already there because you're maxing out capacity, and then the grid operator tells you, we've agreed on 100 number to feed into the grid, and now you want to have an additional capacity with storage, but this is easing the life of grid operators. So all these kind of practical difficulties we have to deal with, which could change very quickly with a goodwill.
Yeah. Svetlana, do you? There's been a lot. We've been doing stories down in your part of the world with Greece, doing deals with the US and importing liquefied natural gas, and that's been quite an interesting development, and who knows where that might lead. Do you have views on the role of gas in energy going in the future in Europe?
I would be fairly honest on this matter. I think it's naive to think that our continent, with the structure of the industry we have at the moment, is going to be 100% independent from external imports in the next 20 to 30 years. We're never going to be 100% independent. We're always going to need some external support, and importing resources, energy resources from somewhere else because we've exhausted ours. Having said that, it doesn't mean that our strategic and climate goals shouldn't change. They are already in the right direction, and we're doing everything as we speak here, and there have been many examples that we've pointed out. But the point I want to make is like realizing that we're still going to need some imports from outside should remind us the issues we faced in the last few years and should always keep us in the right track and direction in terms of diversification of suppliers. I'm just afraid that at the moment we are just switching from one full dependency to another one.
From Russia to the US, is that?
And I hope we do realize that diversification is not applicable only to the energy resources, but also to the suppliers. So that's going to be one of my messages, to keep that in mind and to ensure that we are still going to need something which is not coming from the EU, but let's make sure that we are not putting all the eggs in the same basket from that perspective. And speaking about storage and batteries, of course, this is key for us, and we should invest. And there've been a lot of emphasis from the regulatory framework as well. But also, let's keep in mind that we should rely on some European technologies on that side, not only on imports for the raw materials for building those batteries. Because from the regulatory perspective, we've always been speaking about net zero emission. Net zero means the whole process. Mm-hmm. It doesn't simply mean that the final product.
So making sure the batteries are manufactured in a way
it's from the beginning to the end to the recycling afterwards.
Yeah, it's proved very difficult though to do
it
that.
It is, but we shouldn't forget that.
I used to cover mining in Australia, and they were always trying to build lithium processing plants there, and they just couldn't figure out how to do it, so they just sent it all to China, where they figured it out. We're coming towards the end. Alexander, you measured, you're sort of suggesting some kind of emergency measure basically to keep these high energy industries on life support until we can figure out a new energy system that works. What does that mean exactly in concrete terms? Does that mean subsidies, buying more gas and subsidizing that? I mean, give us some concrete examples.
What we're thinking about at the moment is really rather on the electricity side. So I've alluded to some of them before. So it's about state aid guidelines.
Okay. Sorry, wait a sec. I think Svetlana, you're in a rush. Sorry.
Yeah, I'm really sorry for this. Didn't mean to interrupt, but thank you so much.
Sorry.
Very pleasant discussion.
Thanks so much for joining us. Thank you. Sorry for interrupting you.
It's really about making use of all the instruments that are available. So just as an example, there are those upcoming renewed guidelines for state aid under the EU ETS, where there are provisions for indirect cost compensation. So a compensation for an increased price of electricity that is triggered by the EU ETS and that our competitors outside Europe do not have to pay. So that is something where in the last 5 years, plastics was not eligible. So we hope we will be in again for the next phase, 2026 to 2030, like our upstreams, organic chemicals, in that we're also going to have there an approach that really covers the actual needs of the plants, because we're afraid that the benchmark approach is that maybe chosen may not really do justice and may in the end even penalize those plants that invest into electrification as a means to bring down their carbon footprint.
Just one, there's a million questions I'd like to ask, but maybe one that's most pertinent to this topic is the question that we touched on of permitting and just getting the infrastructure built. What do you think, just to finish off, is this a problem, first of all, from your point of view? And sometimes it seems to me this is really often it's about environmental studies, to see if it's all going to be environmentally sound. That takes ages. There's the sort of NIMBYism. Local groups don't like power lines built. What's the answer to this problem?
Yeah. So definitely I can confirm that this is still a problem. Even if we have very good rules at the European level, we don't see that those good permitting rules are implemented in Europe. We've just done a study recently, monitoring once more, what has been done in different member states, and we see that there's still big differences, and not implementation everywhere. So what is the main bottlenecks? I think it's difficult to say. I mean, we've been looking at 6 or 7 different things that would need to happen to speed up permitting. It's clear that digitalization is one of the things, that processes are not yet digitalized. That understaffing is still a problem in many authorities, but then also one-stop shop and other things. It's a lot of processes that are not yet built in an efficient way, and that makes that permitting is still taking far too long in Europe.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I think we're just about out of time, so thank you so much for that conversation, which I thought was really interesting. I'd like to carry on. I think for me, the big takeaway from this is there is a vision of what the European grid should look like. It's a hopeful vision. It's sort of independent, clean, but it's a long way off. And I guess the big question, as we saw from Alexander, is can a lot of European industry survive and wait long enough for that to be the case? So that's, I think, going to be one of the big topics that we're going to focus on. But thank you so much.
Thank you.